Mr. Pack. We are back with you, or at least I hope we are. Are you there?
Yes, good afternoon, I'm here.
Good afternoon, so you can see me and hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good, thank you very much. Well, we can see you and hear you very clearly, so I'm going to invite Ms. Troop then to carry on if you're ready to continue, are you?
I am.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, Ms. Troop.
Thank you. Mr. Pack, I'm going to take you first to the email that I think you were referring to just before we broke for lunch. So if we could have a look, please, at KIN 30024981. And while that's coming up, this is the first of the 21 documents that was provided very recently to the inquiry and which I can now put to you. If we can go to the bottom of that, please, to the second page. Well, sorry, so if we go up again to page 1 to the very bottom, we can see that this is an email sent on the 14th of November 2008 from Barry Turner of the LABC to someone called Chris George at Kingspan. And if we now go down to page 2, thank you, we can see that Tony Millichap is copied in. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And essentially what is attached here, this is about an LABC document to do with Kingspan's tapered roofing insulation products.
Yes.
If we go up, please, to the next email up, we can see that Tony Millichap forwards Barry Turner's email to Philip Heath, to you, and to Gareth Mills, and he's obviously quite pleased with it. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if we go now to the top, to Mr. Heath's email, which is the 16th of November, is this the email you were referring to? It's sent to you, Mr. Meredith and Mr. Mills, and in it, Mr. Heath says, please advise if we can get one of these for K15 in relation to its use above and below 18 meters.
Yes, correct.
All right. If we go to the next new document, please, that's at KIN 30024982. In the middle of the page, we see the same email from Barry Turner to Chris George and Tony Millichap from the 14th of November. Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
And if we go up, please, to the top email, there we see that on the 21st of November, you have in fact contacted Barry Turner of the LABC.
Yes, correct.
And you say that you've left him a voicemail.
Yes.
Am I right in thinking that that was you essentially taking on this job in response to Mr. Heath's email we've just looked at?
Yes.
Right, and if we move to the next one then, please, going through it briefly, it's KIN 30024983. Halfway down the page, we can see Barry Turner's response to you on the same day, the 21st of November, quite late in the evening, 20:59, yes?
Yes.
Sorry I did not get back to you today. He says that he's been tied up, and then at the end of that email, we'll hopefully catch up with you on Monday.
Yes.
And if we go up in that email chain, please, to the top, there's your email back to him on the 24th of November, which is the Monday. Dear Barry, thank you for your email. I have tried you a couple of times this morning. I'd be grateful if you could ring me when you are free. Yes?
Yes.
So by 12:23 on the 24th of November, you'd already tried to ring Barry Turner a couple of times.
Yes.
Right, and then moving on, please, to KIN 30024984. Just looking at the top email, this is the next day, the 25th of November. You email Mr. Turner again before 10 a.m. Barry, please can you update me as to the business development person that is going to contact me and when this is likely to be? How did you know that that was the next stage? Do you think you had spoken to Barry Turner before you sent this email?
I Cannot recall.
All right. I want to ask, there are a lot of emails from you here to him. From your point of view, Mr. Pack, was there some urgency to this project, to obtaining this certificate?
No, no urgency. For whatever reason, I've obviously tried to contact him. He's tried to contact me. He's obviously busy, but there was no urgency from my point of view.
All right. Let's go now to the meeting that we've referred to a few times. And you've confirmed, I think, that David Jones of Herefordshire Building Control was present, yes?
Yes, correct.
And that your line manager, Philip Heath, was also present.
Yes, correct. Now, I only know that from reading and also hearing. At the time, I couldn't remember who was in the room, but it's come out that he was the person that was present.
Yes, fine. In terms of when the meeting took place, I don't think we need to go to it, but in your witness statement, and this is just for the transcript, it's KIN 408702, page 37, paragraph 7.61. Excuse me. You say that you thought David Jones was present and that the meeting took place not long before May 2009. Do you remember saying that in your witness statement?
No.
All right. Do you think that's right now, thinking about it?
No, I didn't say the meeting took place in May 2009.
Let's go to it so that I don't cause any confusion. Could we have up, please, KIN 408702 and page 37? We're looking at the last two lines of that paragraph 7.61. I believe that David Jones of LABC will have been present and that the meeting took place not long before May 2009.
Correct, yes. That's not saying it was May 2009. Obviously, when I did this statement, a lot of the information that we've initially had wasn't available, but I knew it was before May 2009 because that was when the certificate was produced. So it had to be before May 2009.
Yes, I understand. All right, well, let's have a look at another email chain which will assist us. It's KIN 30249887. I don't think we need to go through it all, but if you look at the top email, please, you can see that you are emailing David Jones on November the 27th, and that you say there, dear David, 2 p.m. on Friday the 5th is fine, ask for me at main reception. That's Friday the 5th of December, and that's the meeting that's been arranged.
That's correct.
All right, so we know that the meeting took place on the 5th of December 2008. We need to go back now. I want to talk to you about what occurred at the meeting. If we can go, please, to your witness statement again at KIN 408702 and to page 37. So if we look at paragraph 7.62, in the first line, about halfway along the first line, talking about this meeting, you say, I don't recall that we specifically discussed the suitability for use of K15 over 18 meters. And you go on from there, just stopping there. Is there any reason you would not have discussed with David Jones the suitability for use of K15 over 18 meters?
Cannot recall the actual discussion that took place around that topic.
All right, well, bearing in mind that when Mr. Heath first emailed the three of you,
Yes.
Mr. Meredith, you, and Mr. Mills, what he had said was, we've just looked at it, can we get one of these for K15 above and below 18 meters? Bearing in mind that that was his initial purpose, if you like, do you think there's any reason you wouldn't have discussed the suitability of the product for use over 18 meters?
I think it would have gone along the lines of, we're looking at K15 as an insulation board, and we will be looking at buildings below and above 18 metres. But whether we actually discussed the suitability of it, that was left for LABC to confirm that. We were looking for something that was similar to what had been done before, using K15, and I'm sure in that meeting we would have discussed below 18 metres and above 18 metres.
You're sure you would have done?
I'm sure we would have discussed above and below 18 metres, yes.
All right. I want to take you to show you David Jones's recollections of the meeting. Those are set out in his witness statement. So if we can get that up, please. It's HBC 6029. And I'd like to take you to page 9, please. Do you see that at the bottom of the page, he's talking about this meeting and he says, from memory, the main themes of that meeting were, and then if we go over the page to page 10, please. The Kingspan representatives gave an overview of the product and its properties and how, where it was intended to be used. In particular, the technical representatives were enthusiastic about the fire testing that Kingspan had commissioned for K15 and the fact that it had been shown to be suitable for use in buildings with stories over 18 metres. Do you remember that?
I don't remember being enthusiastic, no.
Do you think that he's wrong about that?
All I can record is that we had brought along to the meeting a copy of our K15 product literature, and we brought along with us our BBA certificate. We brought no fire testing data into the meeting.
No.
So I couldn't have been very enthusiastic about fire testing data if I had nothing in front of me. I do remember that we spoke about the fact that we wanted to be able to look at this product for use above and below 18 metres. But for us to be enthusiastic about the fire testing, from my point of view, I don't recall me being enthusiastic about the fire testing.
Well, he says about the fire testing that Kingspan had commissioned for K15, that's in the third line. And I mean, that might be past or future fire testing. Do you remember talking with David Jones about fire testing at all for K15?
I remember mentioning that we had done a large-scale fire test. I remember having the BBA certificate.
Yes.
I referred to that particular section in the BBA certificate. I would have mentioned that we had done a fire test because obviously we wanted to understand how we could take that particular fire test and the BBA certificate and the literature, and how do we go forward from here?
Yes, I see. And so when you mentioned that you had done that particular fire test, do I understand correctly that you mentioned that to David Jones still without having read that test report and still without knowing what the test had been conducted on?
So when we were sat at the meeting, I cannot recall exactly the words we discussed, but obviously my line manager was there. He, the technical manager, he would have no doubt been able to pick up those questions because he was the person that was directly involved with that side of the business.
Yes,
so,
I understand. But going back to what you've just told us, which is that you mentioned the BS 8414 test, do I understand correctly that you did that and that you went into that meeting with Mr. Jones without having read the 8414 test report and still not knowing what the test had been conducted on?
Yes, as far as I was concerned, we had a test that was based on 8414 with a non-combustible substrate and a non-combustible cladding.
The documents you took with you into the meeting were the BBA certificate and the product literature, K15's product literature, yes?
Correct.
Those, had they been requested by David Jones, or did you and Mr. Heath just bring them along to offer them to him?
I cannot recall.
Fine. Do you remember telling David Jones that K15 was suitable for use over 18 metres?
I would have discussed the fact that we were looking to the use of K15 above 18 metres and how we could move this forward based upon the fact that we had a fire test based upon a non-combustible background and a non-combustible cladding.
All right. I need to take you back to the witness statement, actually, please. So it's HBC 6029 and back to page 10. If we look at the second paragraph, he says there, I asked what Kingspan hoped to achieve from the LABC type approval process, given the supporting information they already had in the form of test results and a BBA certificate. The response was that it was very much a marketing aim to have the LABC brand associated with their product, and they wanted the opportunity to further emphasize the suitability of K15 in buildings over 18 meters, again for marketing purposes. Now, before we go to page 20 of this statement, please, to the first paragraph. At the third line down, halfway along, do you see the word furthermore?
Yes.
Mr. Jones says there, furthermore, they wanted the opportunity to further emphasize the suitability of K15 in buildings over 18 meters, again for marketing purposes. This latter point seemed to me to be significant to Kingspan, who wanted to capitalize on the testing which had been carried out and the very recent issue of BBA certificate 084582, which incorporated details of those tests. Do you recall emphasizing the suitability for use of K15 over 18 meters, or that being a significant point for you and Mr. Heath during the meeting?
I think the document was not necessarily just about over 18 metres, as I said earlier on in my witness statement today.
No, I'm not asking about the document. If you can, please, just in terms of concentrating on what was said at the meeting, and I appreciate it's difficult, do you think he is wrong in his recollection that the suitability for use of the product over 18 metres was significant for you and Mr. Heath? Do you say that Mr. Jones is wrong about that?
Yes.
Do you say that he's wrong in his recollection that you and Mr. Heath wanted to capitalise on the testing which had been carried out?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word capitalise.
No, sure, all right. Well, you might not use that word, but build on then.
No, I think if you look at the actual meeting itself, it wasn't solely about above 18 metres.
No.
For us to capitalise on that, no, I disagree with that. We wanted a document that would cover, in general, above and below 18 metres.
Yes. I'm aware, of course, that you might have discussed other issues at the meeting. I want to take your comments on Mr. Jones's recollections, and his recollection is that a significant point for you and Mr. Heath appeared to be the testing which had been carried out and capitalising on that and the recent issue of the BBA certificate. You don't remember that being a significant?
No.
If we can go back to page 9 of HBC 6029, please, to the penultimate paragraph. Do you see, it begins to the best of my recollection. And he says there, to the best of my recollection, Andrew Pack led that meeting for Kingspan.
Yes.
And I recall there being at least one other person from Kingspan in attendance. Did you lead that meeting?
I led the meeting as so much I met him at the reception area, and I greeted him upstairs to meet my technical manager. But as I led the meeting, I mean, it depends on which topics we're referring to here, because there was obviously 3 of us in the meeting. It was not led by myself. There was many different discussions that we took place in the room. So I wouldn't say I actually led the meeting. Okay, I actually met Mr. Jones at reception, brought him up to the room, brought my technical manager in. We had the meeting. We obviously spoke about different things.
Yeah.
And then actually, I led Mr. Jones down to reception. But I wouldn't say I actually led the meeting. I guess it comes back to how do you mean by led the meeting? Do you mean taking minutes?
No, I'll have to ask Mr. Jones what he means by led the meeting. I would assume, and I am guessing, that he means was in charge of the meeting from Kingspan's side, did most of the talking, perhaps, took the lead. I don't think he means met him at reception. Let me put it differently. I mean, I think your answer is that you disagree with him. Of you and Mr. Heath, as far as you can recall, who did most of the talking?
I cannot remember.
Did you tell David Jones at any time during the course of that meeting that K15 was suitable for use over 18 metres without conditional qualification?
I cannot recall saying that. I would have shown the information that we had. I would have discussed that we have done a fire test. And I would have said that the fire test was based upon a non-combustible background and a non-combustible cladding.
Why did you not bring the test report to offer to Mr. Jones during the meeting?
Because I didn't have access to the test reports.
Is it something you discussed with Philip Heath beforehand?
No.
Neither of you raised the possibility of offering that test report to David Jones?
No.
Did Philip Heath at any time during the meeting, as far as you can recall, tell David Jones that K15 was suitable for use over 18 metres without conditional qualification?
I cannot recall.
Did you tell him at any stage, you've said that you discussed the fire test that had been carried out. Well, let me ask you this first. Were you clear with David Jones that there was one large-scale fire test and no others?
I cannot recall the actual wording, but we would have shown, as we had the documents in the meeting,
Yes.
we would have shown the BBA certificate and the product literature.
Yes.
So that would have been the reference to what was discussed.
Did either you or Philip Heath, as far as you can recall, tell David Jones that K15 in December 2008, when you met him, was suitable for use over 18 metres only in one specific configuration?
I cannot recall the words we actually used, but I would have emphasised that it was based upon a non-combustible substrate and a non-combustible cladding.
It would have been quite important during the course of that meeting, do you agree, that David Jones was not misled or led to believe that K15 could be used in all situations over 18 metres?
Yes, I agree. And that's why when the course following that meeting, if you look at the LABC, in the end, it only covered non-combustible, or I should say limited combustible substrate and limited combustible cladding.
We're coming to that.
Okay.
During the course of the meeting, we don't need to go to it actually, but David Jones tells us in his witness statement that he had no training in relation to the use of materials in buildings over 18 metres, and that there are no high-rise buildings in Herefordshire, so he had no experience in that area. For the transcript, that's at HPC 6029, page 5, in the penultimate paragraph. What I want to ask you is this: did Mr. Jones's lack of experience in that particular area, the use of materials over 18 metres, become apparent to you at any stage during the course of the meeting?
No.
You've talked about the documents you brought to the meeting. I want to just go to that for now. If we go to, actually, yes, if we go please to KIN 30020714. This is an email we're going to come back to in a short while, but there are just a couple of things I want to ask you about it now. If we can go up a little, please, so that we can see the top of that. Oh, there we are. If you look at the third email down in the chain, that is the email that Philip Heath sent to various mailing lists on the afternoon of the 7th of May, announcing that the LABC certificate had been obtained. Have you seen that before?
Yes, I have.
Did you see that email at the time?
I don't recall the email at the time, no.
Would you not have been on Kingspan's technical services mailing list?
I think I was, yeah, I mean, obviously you asked me, do I recall it at the time? I can't recall it at the time, but I have seen it since the whole inquiry, and I've been looking through the emails, but I couldn't hold hand on heart and say I remember that email. But I have read it since, yes, during the inquiry.
All right. At the next email up in the chain, do you see the email from Malcolm Rochford to Philip Heath on the same day at 4:10?
Yes, I do.
He says, out of curiosity, which fire test results did we use to get this? And I appreciate you weren't copied into this, but I think you have seen these before.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Since the inquiry.
Yes, fine. And Philip Heath's response at the top of the page is this: we can be very convincing when we need to be. We threw every bit of fire test data we could at him. We probably blocked his server. In the end, I think the LABC convinced themselves cool therm is the best thing since sliced bread. We didn't even have to get any real ale down him. First of all, do you agree that that email, Philip Heath's email, gives the impression that he was quite surprised at how convincing you and he had been able to be with the LABC?
Yes, and I totally disagree with that email.
You disagree with his email? What do you disagree with about? Can we have it back up, please? I'm so sorry. It's KIN 30020714. What do you disagree with about it?
Well, first of all, we never actually provided any fire test data other than what was in the actual BBA certificate and the literature. I would have thought during the actual whole process, and obviously this is where I guess you need to look at the whole procedure that was at the time. We were never asked to provide any fire test data during the whole course of this process.
No.
I mean, at the initial meeting, I presented the literature, I presented the BBA. It was the only information that I had access to.
Yes.
Following that meeting, obviously, Herefordshire Council went away to do their due diligence, understand how they could move this forward.
Yes.
And then obviously, once the new year came, they came back with what they said was the right way to go forward.
All right, we'll come on to that.
There was no fire test data given whatsoever, so I can't see how we blocked the server.
No. I mean, putting it plainly, that's nonsense, isn't it?
Yes.
At the meeting, you gave him the BBA certificate and Kingspan's product literature at the time. And after the meeting, so between your meeting on the 5th of December 2008 and the certificate being issued in May 2009, you did not send him anything else, did you, in terms of data or certificates?
Correct. And we were never asked for anything.
Let's look, please, at the BBA certificate, which is the one that you will have presented to him at the meeting on the 5th of December 2008. Well, we'll come to it. I want to ask you first, I think you say, we don't need to go to it, but you say in your witness statement, and for the transcript, this is at paragraph 7.1 on page 23 of KIN 408702. You say that you did not have any direct involvement in the BBA certification process. Is that right?
That's correct.
Before presenting the BBA certificate to David Jones at your meeting in December 2008, had you read it?
I would have read sections of it, yes. I would have been
familiar with it. Document?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, obviously, it was a document that contained many different sections, not just about fire. you have thermal, you have moisture, you have
Yeah.
structure. So, I mean, to read it before the meeting, no, I wouldn't have done that. I would have been familiar with the sections of the BBA and how it was broken up.
All right, let's take a look at it together. That document, excuse me, is at BBA 60, I think, 38. This is the first BBA certificate for K15. And if you look at the bottom of this page, page 1, it says date of first issue on the left-hand side, 27th of October, 2008. So can we agree, Mr. Pack, that this is the version or the issue that you will have shown to David Jones in December 2008?
Yes.
All right. If we look, it's just towards the top of the screen I can see now, there's a section under the heading Key Factors Assessed in bold. The first section is thermal performance, then condensation risk, and then we see a section behavior in relation to fire. Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
While we're on it, it says that the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. Had you read that phrase before your meeting with David Jones?
No, I hadn't.
You hadn't read it at all?
I can't recall reading it before the meeting, no.
Right. Do you know what it means?
It sounds as if it's saying that the boards won't contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke toxic hazard.
Yes.
So is this the wording from the BBA? Or is this...
Well,
so this is the BBA writing this document, isn't it? So I guess the BBA is stating...
I'm sorry, I'm overspeaking you. Go ahead.
I'm assuming this is a standard document that the BBA produces that obviously covered these 3 or 4 points, and the BBA have come up with this wording. How they've come up with the wording, I don't know.
No, that's fine. I don't intend to ask you about how they've come up with that wording. I'm just actually interested in your interpretation of what those words mean.
Okay. It's mentioned that the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire.
I mean, it sounds, would you agree, that it's essentially saying that K15 boards won't catch fire?
Will not contribute. I mean, I guess it's how much does it mean contribute?
All right, well,
it's not the best word, I have to say, reading it.
Did you say it's not the best wording?
It's not the best wording because it says the boards will not contribute, but what does it mean by contribute?
Indeed. All right, let's go on to page 5 of this certificate, please, and to section 7, which I think starts towards the bottom of page 5. Yes, so this is the detailed section on behaviour in relation to fire. And if we look at the first bullet point, there's a description there of the test to BS 8414 part 1. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
It's quite long, and I don't intend to take you through all of that. But if we can just look at the last 3 lines. So if you look at the third line up from the bottom, right to the end of that line at the word within.
Yes.
Within the stated test time, the temperature at the level 2 thermocouples did not exceed 600 degrees, therefore displaying limited fire spread away from the fire source, and that the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135. Had you seen that before?
No.
Do you agree, looking at it now, that it is not correct to state that the product meets the criteria within BR 135?
I must admit, because I'm not familiar with the workings of BR 135, I'm not familiar with this sentence.
No.
I cannot comment on whether the sentence is right or wrong. I'm assuming the BBA have wrote this document.
Yes,
So
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm assuming the BBAs wrote this document, so they must follow a procedure where they've come up with this wording.
I don't want you to worry too much about the authorship of it. Really what I'm trying to get is your understanding of the meaning of it. Now, you've told us a number of times that you understand BS 8414 to be a system test, and that system tested is assessed against the criteria in BR 135, yes?
Correct.
All I'm asking you in very simple terms is whether you agree with me that it is incorrect to state that a product as a standalone product, one component, meets the criteria in BR 135.
Yes, I agree.
Right. I just want to take you, please, to an email chain in 2009. It's KIN 409103. If you look at the top of that page, we can see that this is an email from Philip Heath to you, and again to Mr. Meredith and Mr. Mills, copy to Gwyn Davis on the 5th of March 2009. And then if we can go down, please, to the bottom of the page, the bottom of page 1 rather. Do you see that there's an email there from George Lee of the BBA sent on Christmas Eve 2008 to Gareth Mills and someone else at the BBA?
Yes, I can.
And then just so that it's clear and I'm setting it in context, if we go back up to the top of page 1, I should have said this. The entire chain is in fact forwarded to you by Philip Heath. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right, so with apologies, back down to the bottom of page 1, please. So this is just a couple of months after the first certificate, the first BBA certificate for K15 has been issued, because that was the 27th of October 2008, yes?
Yes.
And here we are in December 2008. In his
Yes.
opening paragraph, Mr. Lee says this: "Hi Gareth, we've recently received a number of comments on the K15 certificate in relation to the clarity of the wording used as part of this certificate's fire section." Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And he then goes on to make some proposals, some proposed amendments in relation to improving the clarity of the wording. And if you could look, please, at his second bullet point, key factors assessed. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. Yes.
That's the section we've just looked at on page 1 of the BBA certificate, which you said was not the best wording, about the boards not contributing to the development stages of a fire. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And do you see that here at his second bullet point, what Mr. Lee is suggesting is an additional sentence: the product has been tested to BS 84141 for a specific construction on masonry walls. So that's the new proposal he's making to add into the certificate, all right?
Okay.
Do you remember reading this email, George Lee's email, at the time?
No, and I'm wondering why I'm even copied on the email, because I had no involvement with George Lee at BBA.
I see. All right, let's go up, please, to Mr. Heath's response.
Okay.
So if we just go up to the next email, thank you. Mr. Heath doesn't appear to respond until the 5th of March 2009. And just taking it quickly, essentially he says there, Gareth Mills has brought it to my attention. He registers some concern there in the third line about amendments being proposed so soon after issue. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And then he essentially goes on to say, your request is receiving our attention.
Yes.
Now that email was sent to George Lee at 14:47. And if you look up, please, to the top email in the chain, do you see that 2 minutes later at 2:49, Philip Heath emails to you, Mr. Meredith and Mr. Mills, the instruction, let the file gather dust, guys.
Yes, I can.
Can you remember receiving that instruction from Philip Heath?
No.
It's quite an unusual instruction, would you agree?
It is. I don't recall the email. Again, it's interesting how I've been brought into the loop again on these emails. I mean, you raised it earlier about you're trying to understand my role at Kingspan, and it's interesting. Again, it's a clear example of if you look at the names in the to list, you have Ivor Meredith and Gareth Mills.
Yeah.
It's obviously come out of the inquiry that these two individuals, which we won't go into now, but obviously as the department head at the time, I was obviously always available in the office. I sometimes wonder if I was just sent these emails because I was a department head that reported into Philip Heath, as to say, oh, Andrew, just in case these other two are not around, here's an email. But why I keep getting copied in on these emails when I have never had involvement with the BBA or the wording, I do not know other than that.
Well, the upshot of it is that you don't remember receiving it or reading it.
Correct.
I mean, this is an email, again, it isn't copied to
No, I agree.
lots of mailing lists and hundreds of people. It is to you, Mr. Meredith and Mr. Mills again. Did you think, I've asked you this already, but I mean, this is 2009 now. Did you think of saying to Philip Heath, you've misunderstood my role. I don't have anything to do with the BBA. Please would you stop sending me emails about it?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, 2009, I was getting involved in emerging markets. So the time I was transitioning into other roles, I was receiving so many emails. I mean, whether I said to Philip at the time, I cannot recall, but I mean, looking at the emails you've pulled up today, it is quite clear that I'm being brought in on these emails as a 2 or a CC.
Yes.
Hardly any background on the inquiry. I mean, I'd heard of this chap called George Lee at BBA.
Yes.
I've never met the guy or had any involvement with him, and yet, again, yeah, my name's been put on an email and has brought me into this chain of events. But I know at the time in 2009, I was transitioning into emerging markets. I was traveling a fair bit, so a lot of the time when you're receiving the number of emails I did on a daily basis, a lot of the time, and as I said earlier in the inquiry, K15 was not a big product for me, I'm afraid. I had many other products in my portfolio that I actually had my remit to deal with. And a lot of the time, my workload was in other areas of the business. So
yes.
I can only apologise for not being able to provide any more information behind.
No, that's fine. I want to ask you, a few moments ago, when we were talking about the individuals who are in the to list from the email we just looked at, and in fact, those two individuals appear in a lot of the emails that you say you were wrongly copied into, or they're nothing to do with you. I don't know if I interrupted you, but or perhaps you moved on, but you said it's obviously come out of the inquiry that these two individuals, which we won't go into now, what was it that you wanted to say, Mr. Pack, about those two individuals?
I think it's a case of their work ethic, their availability during the working day. Was it in question at the time? Obviously, it's come out in the inquiry now that yes, it is. I mean, there was obviously a lot of talk at the time about these individuals, where their presence was, what were they up to. I can only think that I was copied on these emails was because I was in the office 9 till 7. And it was a means of, at least the person sending the email would know that it went to somebody that might pick it up. But the fact that I was actually not dealing with that type of work with the BBA, I can't understand why I'd be copied in.
All right, thank you. Just thinking more basically about the words that Philip Heath used in that, let the file gather dust, guys. Do you agree that that is a clear instruction to delay the matter of the proposed amendments?
Yes.
one of the projects that you did pick up, obviously, was the LABC certificate. And I want to go back to that now, please, and to, in particular, David Jones's understanding of limited combustibility, because that is an important part of that certificate. So if we can go, please, back to David Jones's witness statement, HBC 6029, and to page 37. Just wait for that to come up. HBC, thank you. Page 37, and it's the second sentence. Is it? Yes, in the second sentence of the last paragraph at the bottom of that page, and we'll just read it all. He's asked about whether or not he was told that K15 was a material of limited combustibility. And his answer is this: if this happened, it would have been in my initial meeting with Kingspan at the start of the Herefordshire Council assessment. However, I cannot from memory recall exact wording or who said what. And so on that basis, it would be wrong of me to say that anybody used the specific phrase limited combustibility. I can say with some certainty, however, that I left that meeting with the clear impression that this is what K15 was. And he goes on to say that he recalls that that was consistent with a general opinion among building control surveyors. Seeing that, and actually I need to ask you, have you seen this witness statement previously, David Jones's witness statement?
Briefly saw it, yes.
Right.
A number of months ago, it was circulated.
Fine.
But I absolutely disagree with the comment that he left that meeting and the understanding that our product was limited combustibility.
Well, I understand. I'm not sure you can disagree with his recollection that he left the meeting with that impression. I think what you're trying to say is that you didn't give that impression, are you?
Absolutely.
Did either you or Mr. Heath say that K15 was a material of limited combustibility?
I can only comment on myself, and I did not say the product was limited combustibility or infer that it was of limited combustibility.
You didn't say it or infer it?
Yes.
Why can you only comment on yourself? Do you, Mr. Heath? Sorry?
I simply cannot recall to what was actually said in that meeting in 2008.
Fine. Talking for yourself then, did you tell David Jones that K15 could be considered to be a material of limited combustibility?
No.
Did you tell David Jones at that meeting or at any other time that the system tested in May 2005 was on, it was a masonry backed system, not a steel frame system?
Yes, it would have been based upon a masonry background, yes.
Told him that?
Yes. However, the literature we had, I believe, showed masonry and steel frame with a non-combustible backing. And I believe it was from that that the LABC was wrote.
Well, did you discuss with David Jones the consensus you described to us earlier that you understood to have been reached, which was that, and you must tell me if I have this wrong from you, which was that there was no need to test 284142, you could just put in a non-combustible liner and have tested 284141. Did you discuss that consensus with him?
I cannot recall.
Do you recall whether or not Philip Heath mentioned to David Jones that after Kingspan's one successful test 28414 in May 2005, the product underwent a significant change in September 2006?
I did not know that myself, and I do not recall that being said in the meeting.
Right. I want to ask this. Was your objective in going into the meeting to obtain as broad and as wide an approval for K15 from the LABC as you could?
I would say we were looking to their advice as to how we could take this product forward.
Yes.
To give us whatever scope we could for using this product in behind rain screen claddings at the time. And that obviously during the discussion would have covered below and above 18 meters.
Yes, all right. Can we look, please, at another of the new documents which has come to us? And this is at KIN 302499. If we can look, please, halfway down the page, we need that blown up a little bit, to David Jones's email to you on the 26th of January 2009. Do you have it?
Yes.
I think this is an email that obviously came to you after your meeting in December.
Yes.
And he says there, apologies for being a while getting back to you. It's all been a bit hectic. I'm going to read the second paragraph with you, and I want to ask you about that. He says there, I have now done the research necessary and come up with what I think will be a usable certificate for acceptance by LABC across the UK. What I have tried to do, as we discussed, is to get away from just assessing K15 as a product in isolation and extend the certificate to represent a system approval for the whole external wall arrangement. Of course, with the other components being undefined and with various options available, this does present some problems, as we established when we met. What I have done, though, is to refer to the 3 standard details contained within the Kingspan literature, unless you have any other standard detail drawings that you think may be more appropriate. And instead of applying a manufacturer's reference to the undefined elements, I have specified a generic standard for each using British standard references. The conclusion being that K15 can be accepted in all locations, provided the other parts of the wall construction meet the standards stated and reflect the Kingspan standard details. Inevitably, most mainstream products will have been manufactured to the appropriate British standard, and so the system, in each case, should be fairly easy to pin down, and the contribution of K15 to the relevant parts of the regulations obvious. And then he goes on to ask for payment. I'm going to ask for your help with that larger paragraph. First of all, is that what you were talking about earlier? You had discussed with him extending the certificate to make it into a system approval, even though it was in fact for a product?
No, it wasn't Kingspan that came up with that idea. We talked to him about, we talked to Herefordshire Council about the product. He went away, discussed with LABC and came back, and his conclusion was that we should treat it as a system approval.
Well, no, but hang on. What he says here is, if you look at the second line of that larger paragraph, what I have tried to do, as we discussed, is to get away from just assessing K15 as a product. Yes. So that must have been discussed at the meeting. He didn't come away from the meeting, come up with the idea that he would extend the certificate into a system approval and then announce it to you here. He's saying to you here, isn't he? We discussed that idea at the meeting, and here's how I'm going to go about it. Do you see?
That's what I'm saying. So at the meeting, we discussed just the product in isolation.
Yes.
He then went away and said, actually, I've now discussed it and I have another solution, which is to treat it as a system approval. So yes, I agree.
That.
So in the meeting we had, we were looking at the product. It was just the product in isolation on its own, just like we did with the tapered insulation. It was talking about the insulation. Obviously, he's now gone away and said, actually, I've now come up with a proposal, and the proposal is that we look at it as a system approval.
But it doesn't say that. Forgive me. It may be that I'm confused. What I think you're trying to say is that you went into the meeting and your only idea was that K15 had to be assessed as a standalone product, and that quite separately, David Jones went away and all by himself, or with whoever he discussed it with, he came up with the idea of extending it to make it into a system approval, and then announced that to you in this email. And sorry, we do need that back up, please.
That's how I see it.
KIN 3024989. That's the way you see it.
That's the way I understood it, yes.
All right, I'm just going to have one last go at this. That's not what it says, is it? If you look at the second line, it says, what I have tried to do, as we discussed, is to get away from just assessing K15 as a product in isolation. That does not say, I've had an idea. Let's not assess it as a product in isolation. Let's extend it to a system. That's something you'd already plainly discussed with him.
Okay, well, I see this, I see it as a system, not as a product in isolation. I mean, when you read the certificate, it is very much a system approval.
We'll come to the certificate. I'm just trying to concentrate on whose idea it was to extend it into a system approval.
That would have been Herefordshire Council in conjunction with LABC, not Kingspan.
You're quite definite about that, despite the content of this email, yes?
Yes, that was my understanding at the time. They came with the idea of creating a system approval.
All right, so this email, when it came to you on the 26th of January, was a complete surprise to you. It was the first you had heard that you were going to move away from assessing a standalone product into extending it to a system approval.
Yes, as far as I can recall, it was very much about the product at the time. And then obviously this email's come through to confirm we've now had a discussion about it to extend it to represent a system approval rather than a product in isolation. And that's, of course, when you read the certificate, you can see that it's clearly written around not just insulation.
Certificate. I'm sorry, all right, so this came up, well, could you help me with this? There's a great deal that you can't recall about what was said during your only meeting with David Jones, but you're absolutely clear, are you, that at no time did you and he, or Philip Heath and he, discuss the idea at the meeting of extending the certificate into a system approval? This is the first you heard of it on the 26th of January.
To my recollection, yes.
Can you just go down, please, to the fifth line? Well, fourth line going into the fifth. Actually, just look at the fourth line at the start of the word, at the start of the sentence, which reads, of course, and then we're going to move on. He says there, of course, with the other components being undefined and with various options available. He means the other components of the external wall arrangement, yes?
Yes.
And with various options available, this does present some problems, as we established when we met. Now, clearly, he's talking about a discussion you had about that during your meeting, isn't he?
I cannot recall what that is in relation to.
Well, what else could it be in relation to?
We couldn't well have spoken about something, but I cannot recall. As my understanding was that we were discussing it about the product in isolation. And then it was only when they'd obviously gone away and done their due diligence that they realized that actually they could pull it into a system. I cannot recall what we actually said in the meeting in terms of system approval, product isolation, but my understanding was that we were solely looking at the insulation.
You can't recall what was said at the meeting, other than that you took no part in extending this certificate to cover the whole external wall arrangement.
No, I didn't take the decision to extend it to cover the whole wall arrangement.
No. All right. I'm so sorry. We're going to go back to that email again, please, and move on within it. It's KIN 2. Yes, remembered the number. I want to look, please, in particular at, it's the 5th line up from the bottom of the 2nd paragraph, the conclusion being that K15. Do you have that?
Yes.
The conclusion being that K15 can be accepted in all locations, provided the other parts of the wall meet the standards stated, and so on. That is not accurate in relation to external wall constructions for buildings over 18 metres, is it?
You'd have to ask Herefordshire Council as to what they're actually referring to there.
Well, I'm asking you, what he says is, the conclusion being that K15 can be accepted in all locations, provided the other parts of the wall construction meet the standards stated and reflect the Kingspan standard details. So
Okay.
what he is saying is that as long as all the other component products in the external wall arrangement meet various British standards and your marketing literature's design details, K15 can be accepted in all locations. That is what that sentence plainly means, isn't it?
Yes, but if you look at the what we would the actual system approval here, it didn't just cover buildings above 18 meters.
No.
This, I mean, you could take that word in that was referring to below 18 meters. If you look at the actual system approval, it was covering below and above 18 meters. And it also stated in there that you had to refer to the wall construction meeting particular standards. So yes, I agree with that. And then also it did have footnotes in the actual standard, in the approval, that said that the back substrate and the cladding had to be of limited combustibility. So you can't just take this sentence and look at it on its isolation on its own.
Well, I am looking at it on its own, Mr. Peck, because yes, I'm aware that the certificate, and we will come to it, contains various caveats. And I'm aware that it applied to the use of K15 both above and below 18 meters. I'm sorry, we need it back up, please. But I'm asking you about this particular sentence, the conclusion being that K15 can be accepted in all locations, provided the following 2 things occur. It doesn't say in all locations below 18 meters. And all I'm asking is whether you are prepared to agree with me that that sentence is not accurate in relation to buildings over 18 meters.
Correct, I agree.
Thank you. Did you think of correcting David Jones about that?
This obviously is an email, so we haven't got all of the rest of what went on from this email.
No, we have. We'll come to that.
Okay.
But I can tell you that you didn't go back and correct him.
Okay.
I mean, well,
I think that the even though I agree that that wording that he put in this paragraph is not correct, I believe that what came off the back of this in terms of the document clearly covered a lot of what you've been asking me in regards to this paragraph and clears up a lot of that.
Let's have a look at the email above this one, please. If you can move up the page. We can see that you actually send it on to Philip Heath the next day on the 30th of January 2009. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what you in fact say to Mr. Heath is this: Phil, we have had the following come back from LABC. I think this looks okay. What do you think? I am thinking of sending him the above renders, though, just to highlight the approval will need to cover not only behind terracotta rain screen, as per the 3 standard details contained within our literature, which he refers to, which is obviously fine, but also for metal, zinc, cassettes, and ceramic granites rain screens, as the latter 2 types of rain screen are popular too. Do you see that?
Yes.
So you did read it at the time and you did understand it at the time.
Okay. So I guess what I'm now saying is that I feel this looks okay. I'm now obviously mentioning let's look at other metal, zinc, cassettes, granites, etc. But I think what we're missing here is that the document wasn't just for buildings above 18. It was
I understand that.
as well, so.
I understand that. But what you absolutely do not do is go back to Mr. Jones and say, hang on, all this is correct, but we must make the distinction. This is not correct or accurate above 18 metres for buildings above 18 metres. You don't do that, do you?
But we do in the final, I can't remember if we actually spoke about it, but I know in the final document that was produced, it does clearly cover non-combustible cladding. So where I've asked, can we also include metal zinc cassettes? We also must have discussed this because no, that actually didn't get into the actual approval.
No.
So
What
clearly,
above renders that you're referring to at the second paragraph, is there an I'm so sorry, at the second line of your email, is there an attachment that I can't see? Sending him the above renders.
yeah, so I'm guessing that will have come out of our standard product literature.
Right.
Because
so that would be the, sorry, would that be the design drawings from within the product literature? Fine.
see, I think because that's the thing with emails, you can't always see what other discussions are going on. I mean, it sounds to me reading through this email trail that David has gone away, he's come back with an idea that we could do this to a system approval. And obviously, as we've seen in that email, I've then obviously forwarded it to my line manager, who's obviously where I've said, I think this looks okay, what do you think? I'm also thinking, could we extend this to other cladding types? I know that that was another chain of events that happened, and I know that that didn't get covered in the document, but the final document, it clearly did cover the fact that you had to have a substrate and a cladding of limited combustibility. So it did answer a lot of the questions down below where it was a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah, we are going to come on to that. I realize I keep saying it, but I do just want you to try. I know it's difficult, but just to concentrate on these emails. There aren't any others that have been provided to us. It is quite clear, I'm going to suggest to you, that what you are trying to do, and you're running it past Philip Heath first, is to extend the certificate even further to include other kinds of popular rain screen cladding materials.
Correct, yes, because most of the inquiries the team used to get were below 18 metres. So
all
there's
right.
a lot of buildings that do have, and as I keep referring, this was not just above 18 metres, this document. I'm
aware of that. Thank you. Philip Heath's response to you on the same day at the top of this email chain is simply, hi, worth a try. And I'm going to suggest to you that he used that wording because that's what you were doing, wasn't it? Trying your luck to see how far and how wide you could get the LABC's scope of approval.
I would disagree with that. I mean, the LABC, or in this case, Herefordshire Council, who we were dealing through, they had a system in place, and we're only following the system that they had. I can only go by what I understand. This system had been in place. We were following the route to market. We had a meeting. They did their due diligence. We're only following what was given to us through this course of proceedings. I mean, we look to the LABC and Herefordshire Council to assist us with this.
Yes, I understand that. And I understand that you say that there was a system in place and that they did their own checks or due diligence. But this email, in which you're running past your own line manager, the idea of extending the scope of the certificate even further,
Yes.
is no part of that system. And further, it's certainly not an admin role, is it, what you're doing there? You're right into the substantive detail of what is going to go into the certificate.
Correct. I'm actually asking the question. I mean, I still class it as an admin role while I was involved with this procedure. And I'm simply asking the question because I know for a fact that there was cladding types like the ones I listed that we wanted to be able to cover our insulation below 18 meters.
Only below 18 meters.
That's for LABC to determine whether it can go above 18 meters. I was simply asking, you have to remember this document was to cover rain screen cladding. Lower than 18, above 18, it was for rain screen cladding. It was up to LABC and Herefordshire Council to do the due diligence to determine which cladding types can be used above and below. And
Do you
subsequently,
think it might have been an idea to make clear to David Jones, so as not to mislead him, which were appropriate for use with K15 over 18 meters and which were not?
I cannot recall what was discussed in the meeting in
No,
terms of that
sure.
particular question.
All right, well, the reason you gave to Mr. Heath in making that suggestion and running it past him is that those were popular rain screens, yes?
Yes.
K15, just so that we're completely clear, had never been incorporated into a system tested to BS 8414, meeting the criteria in BR 135 with any kind of metal cladding, had it?
No, correct. It was only non-combustible cladding or limited
Including
combustibility.
zinc. It'd never been tested with zinc outer cladding.
No.
Or terracotta.
All I knew was it was a non-combustible cladding. So it was whether the terracotta gets pulled into that non-combustible cladding.
As far as you were aware, had K15 ever been tested in a system to 8414 with terracotta cladding?
All I knew that there was a fire test done, but I'm not 100% sure it was terracotta. It was a non-combustible cladding.
Right, I'm going to pause there for a moment, Mr. Pack, and just ask the chairman whether this might be an appropriate time for a pause. I've come to a slightly natural break. Mr. Chairman, I think you might be on mute.
You're quite right. Thank you very much. Well, what I said was, this is a good time if it's suitable as far as you're concerned.
Yes.
All right, good. Well, we'll have a break now, Mr. Pack. We'll come back at 3:30. That's 3:30 our time, of course. And please remember not to speak to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room. All right?
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. 3:30 then, please. Back. We're back with you, at least I hope we are. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I can.
Good afternoon, yes, thank you very much. And are you ready to carry on?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then, Ms. Troop, if you're ready, off you go.
Thank you. Mr. Pack, I'm going to ask you to look at the next of the new emails that have been provided to us quite recently. And it's in fact your response to David Jones's email of the 26th of January. So can we go please to KIN 3024996? If you look halfway down the page, you can see the same email from Mr. Jones that we've just been looking at, sent on the 26th of January, yes? And then if we go up, please, to your email, which is dated the 18th of February, that's your response. And you say this: Dear David, thank you for the update on the application. And then in your second paragraph, you say that you're sending a check. On the third paragraph, you say this: Finally, just picking up on your point below, referring to the 3 standard details contained within the Kingspan call firm K15 literature is acceptable. Just one small point: although we show terracotta clay tile panels, there are many other generic cladding types, all of which are commonly used, and these include zinc, aluminium, stainless steel, ceramic granite, and high pressure laminate, which I'm thinking will be covered by the idea of having this generic standard for each using British standard references. Yes?
Yes, correct.
So there, after your email running your idea of extending into additional cladding types past Mr. Heath, you've actually added a few, haven't you, including high pressure laminate?
Yes.
And I think, in fact, you've added aluminium, stainless steel. None of those had been tested with K15 to BS8414, had they?
This is in relation to below 18 meters. Don't forget the this system approval that was now being talked about was not only covering above 18 meters. So these extra additional ones would have obviously been passed to me. I would have been asked to look at those specific types, as those are the typical types that the team would have been receiving. But you have to remember, this is not solely in relation to above 18 meters. This is also for below 18. And then when the following correspondence after this kicks in, you'll see that when we eventually do create this document, that once it does go above 18, obviously these don't get covered.
All right. In any event, at this stage, neither he, in his email to you of the 26th of January, or you, in your email of the 18th of February, say this is only in relation to use under 18 meters, do you?
Correct, not in the email.
No. All right, if we can go now, please, to KIN 3024997. This is actually the signed application form which you attach to your email on the 18th of February. If you look at the bottom of that document, do you see that it's dated the 18th of February?
Yes.
Is that your signature?
Yes.
Is the handwriting in the body of the form yours?
Yes.
And if we look at section 4, please, description of system, house type, what you've written is this: Kingspan call firm K15 rain screen insulation board for use behind rain screen cladding systems for buildings both less than and more than 18 meters in height. Yes?
Correct. Yes.
There's no indication there that the way in which K15 can be used above 18 meters or below 18 meters is different, is there?
No, because this is I mean, you're limited to what you can put in this form. This is simply a description of what we were looking at in terms of the subject matter. It wasn't to go into any depth other than to just explain that we wanted to look at K15 fall behind rain screen claddings for those buildings above and below 18 metres.
Indeed, and where you went into more depth was in the emails that we just looked at, yes?
Yes.
I want to take you back to your witness statement, please. So KIN 408702 and to paragraph 7.60. This is, I think, your summary of your role, which you've described now as an admin role. My role was contacting the LABC for an initial meeting, attending that initial meeting, sending them the 2 documents they had requested, and then receiving the certificate in 2009. Yes?
Yes, at the time when I wrote this witness statement, correct.
So at the time when you wrote this witness statement, you had forgotten about the correspondence we've just looked at.
Yes.
And you had forgotten about your suggestions to include additional popular types of rain screen cladding.
Yes.
If we could look also, please, at paragraph 7.54 of your witness statement, which is on page 35. There you say, the initial discussions involved us saying, here are our documents, which included the K15 marketing literature and the BBA certificate. And off the back of that, the LABC would issue a certificate, which contained a number of conditions. And we're going to come back to the end of that. It's not quite right, is it, that that's all you did? Having looked through the correspondence from the time, there was a bit more to it than that.
Yes, I mean, when I wrote this witness statement, a lot of the emails which you've pulled up today were not available. Trying to record something back in 2008, in my mind, I just remembered it being a very simplified process. If I was to draw a diagram of how it went forward, I remember having a meeting. I then remember presenting 2 documents. I remember then a break for the end of the year. We came back in the new year. Herefordshire Council and LABC had obviously discussed the route forward.
Yes.
And today we've seen there's a couple of emails which obviously we've highlighted today. But following that, yeah, I think the procedure, I mean, obviously I was a stand-in to do this. It was not my remit to be a project manager on certification. I was obviously called in to do this, as we mentioned earlier. To me, I didn't know anything different, but it just felt very much like an admin role.
Well, did it feel like an admin role when you were making suggestions to David Jones in the emails we've seen as to the technical content and what should be included, never mind what went into the end certificate for now? Did that feel to you like an admin role, making suggestions as to the actual technical content of the certificate?
Well, those were passed to me, as I said earlier, by colleagues. So they would have said, look, can we look to maybe look at these types of cladding as part of this approval?
Which colleague?
Colleagues in the department.
Was that by email?
No, I mean, like, for example, we all knew within the team, like, the different types of cladding that you have on buildings above and below 18 metres. So all I can think of is that generally when you're in a team and you're working on inquiries, people get to know about the types of cladding that are being used. And I can only think that personnel would have said, Andrew, can you please look to maybe include these on this approval? And as you've seen, there was an extra 2 added on. So obviously, again, somebody's come to me and said, what about adding these?
Well, it's not obvious, is it? Because, I mean, you've just told us that, but all right, so that's your evidence that you made those suggestions because, and you can only think that it's because someone else told you to do so. I think that's your evidence.
Yes, I mean, at the time we were obviously looking for this document to be able to cover many different cladding types. And those would have been the typical ones that the team would have been receiving on a daily basis.
Yes, and it's right, isn't it, that you were looking for the certificate to include a number of popular rain screen cladding types, because that would be of benefit to Kingspan in terms of the sales of K15.
Yes, but at the same time, making sure that LABC and Herefordshire Council do their due diligence and make sure that the certificate covered appropriately the use of those claddings above and below 18 metres.
All right, can we go now, please, to another of the new documents, KIN 3024990. If we go to the second email down on the 27th of February 2009, David Jones to you. Do you see that?
Yes.
Have you seen this email now?
Yes.
He says in the opening paragraph, I've now had the formal registration through, so would just like to run the attached past you before I send it off to them. And then he goes on. The draft of his type approval summary is actually attached to this email. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Do you remember receiving the draft?
I actually don't remember this email until in fact, when I did my witness statement, I don't remember this email, but I have seen this email in the last number of months. I don't record this email coming to me, but it's obviously come to me on the 27th of February.
Yes.
And it does state that my summary of findings is attached. So I'm assuming there must have been something attached to this email.
There was, we'll come to that. Can you just help me with something that you just said? When did you first see this email?
I think it was during it's definitely after my witness statement.
Yes. Well, that's the 19th of September 2019.
Yeah, so it was when all the emails were starting to be found on the system.
When was that? Do you know?
Well, I tend to get emails whenever they find emails in the system, they will highlight them to me.
I see. All right. Can we go back to that email, please? 3024990. In the third paragraph there, David Jones says, I think I've covered your last comments with regard to the standard details. Although the type approval refers to the 3 design details, this is just to establish the overall form of construction to be employed. The choice of inner substrate and rain screen cladding system are left open to choice, subject to each of them meeting the standards listed further down. Do you see that?
Yes.
I appreciate you've said you don't remember receiving it, but he's essentially just repeating there what he said to you in his email of the 26th of January, isn't he?
Yes.
It's obvious from that paragraph that David Jones had taken your comments into account, isn't it?
Yes, and it's clear that he has decided not to run with my comments.
Well, or he's decided that the summary as it is already deals with and covers the comments you've made, yes?
Yes, I think it must have got too complicated in the end, that they've obviously decided to, they obviously took on board what we were trying to say about the fact that the team wanted other claddings to be considered, but reading this paragraph and how the eventual document came out, it looks to be as if they decided not to run with those cladding types. And clearly, I know that the actual system approval in the end only covered non-combustible cladding in the end.
Right. Going up to the top email in this chain, please. Do you say that you respond to David Jones on the 2nd of March? Thank you, we're happy with the content and for you to proceed with formal issue.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
You did not propose any changes to the type approval summary draft that he attached to his email, did you?
I cannot recall.
All right, well, we certainly haven't found any evidence of that. I want to show you a different email. This is KIN 3024991. And this is before you go back to David Jones to say that you're content for him to issue the certificate. Do you see that at the bottom of page 1, there is the 27th of February 2009 email from Mr. Jones to you attaching the draft?
Yes.
And if we go up, please, you forward it, do you see that, at 11:35 to Philip Heath?
Yes.
There's no message, just that you forwarded.
Yes, because that was my role.
Sorry?
That was my role to feed it back to the technical manager.
Right. His response to you comes on the 1st of March 2009, and he says, "Hi Andy, well done. Make no mistake, this document could be gold, not just for K15, but potentially the cool therm range. Please progress this ASAP to the next stage. Once we get a final draft sorted, we can then circulate to a select few. Pedal to the floor. Regards, Phil." It seems, would you agree, that there was some urgency to obtaining this from that email?
Yeah, I cannot comment on what Phil Heath was insinuating there. Pedal to the floor. You'd have to ask Philip what the background to this text was.
Well, we didn't have this email, unfortunately, when he came to give his evidence. But what I'm asking you is what, well, first of all, do you remember receiving it? Do you remember him congratulating you in this way?
I don't remember the email, but I do remember him saying, congratulations on getting the LABC approval, but I'm not sure if it was around this date. I think it was more later on, I believe.
Do you remember this email or not?
No.
Right. What do you...
Not my recollection anyway.
Fine. Looking at it now, what do you think he might have meant by saying that this document could be gold in capital letters?
I do not know what he was meaning by gold.
Well, we can presume, I think, that he means that it's valuable, that it's something that's very beneficial to Kingspan. Are you saying that you were unaware that that's how it was received?
Yes.
You were unaware of that?
Yes.
Right. So you don't know what might have led Philip Heath to congratulate you on obtaining it?
No, because actually it hasn't been, because this is 1st of March. I don't think we actually got the certificate.
March, so he's just seen from you that the draft has come through.
But that's what you just said then. I disagree with that because this is still a draft, so it's not the final document. So I do not know what Philip meant by gold, and yeah, I can't comment on that.
Can we just go back to your witness statement briefly, please? It's KIN 408702 at page 38. And if we look, please, at paragraph 7.65, I'll just read it with you. We had provided the LABC with the documents they had requested, and they had drafted the certificate based on those documents. We relied on their approval and due diligence process, and so had no reason to be concerned about the wording or content. As far as I can recall, we were not provided with a draft copy of the certificate, which we were offered the opportunity to comment upon or review. And so I consider that the LABC were entirely responsible for the contents of the certificate. Mr. Pack, I think you accept now, or you must do, that a draft was sent to you because we've just looked at that email.
Correct. But that question was done prior to that email, which I just said I didn't remember. And also the question was, did LABC send me a draft? And no, they didn't send me a draft from LABC.
I see, but you received it from Hereford.
Yes, now that we've seen the email, they sent us those 4 bullet points listing those documents.
Yes. All right. Well, can we have that back up, please? Paragraph 7.65 of your witness statement. So it's 4 zeros. Thank you. Do you see that you say that, as far as I can recall, you weren't provided with a draft?
That's what I recalled at the time when I wrote this statement, yes.
I understand, and that's fine. And you say there, and so I consider that the LABC were entirely responsible for the contents. My question to you is this: having now seen that you did receive a draft, do you consider that Kingspan bore any responsibility for the content?
I guess in hindsight, when we come to look at the document in a moment, there is some instances where there was a responsibility from Kingspan to possibly be more engaged in making sure the wording was more accurate. However, we will look to LABC and Herefordshire Council for their understanding and responsible, as they were the third party doing this. And when you do read the certificate, it does state on there, and we'll go through that in a moment, that it wasn't a clear sign off of the use of this product on projects across the UK. And there's a clear statement on the actual certificate, and there's also clear wording in the actual approval. So yes, I agree. We did have some responsibility in making sure that wording was correct, but we relied upon LABC and Herefordshire Council, as they were the body that we looked to help us with regards to this approval.
Understood. Can we go now, please, to KIN 4024993? If we scroll to the very end of the page, please, I think. And in fact, onto page 2. We can see that on the 7th of May, you are sending the final formal confirmation of the system approval certificate and other documents, other associated documents, to Philip Heath.
Yes, correct.
And then there is a bit of admin. If we go up, please, to the next email in the chain, Philip Heath asks you whether, in fact, the summary can be provided on headed paper. I'm going up again, please. If you look at the, well, you say there on the 7th of May at 11:53, yes, David is working on that. And then if we go up again, please, to your email to Philip Heath at 14:29, all on the same day, you say, this looks better. And I think, you must tell me if I'm wrong, that's because the summary on headed paper has been received as Philip Heath requested.
Yes.
And Mr. Heath's response, if we go to the top of the chain, is fan-bloody-tastic.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I don't, but now you've shown me it. I can see that he's obviously replied to me after I've said this looks better.
Yes, and he's obviously pretty pleased, isn't he?
Yes.
Do you say that you don't know why?
I guess because we're now into May 2005 and the system approval certificate has been issued. He's obviously very happy with that. He's obviously seen that we've got an approval system on the tapered system, and now we have one on K15. But again, you'd have to ask Philip Heath why he was so.
No, I'm asking about your understanding as to why he was so very pleased about it.
Oh, I cannot comment
Fine.
on why he was so excited.
Let's look, please, at the final issued version of the certificate and the approval summary. Can we go, please, to KIN 405705? This is the actual certificate on the first page, yes?
Yes.
Do you have it, Mr. Pack?
Yes.
And it's dated the 1st of May 2009 in the top right-hand corner.
Yes.
And then looking at the top of the first page, we see the certificate holder's details. Obviously, that's Kingspan. And at section 2, the description. And it says system title, description, Kingspan Cool Therm K15 rain screen board. Yes?
Yeah.
And then we see section 3, documents, and then a section about documents relied on to carry out the assessment and various other details. I want to take you over, please, to page 3. There's a blank page at page 2, so onto page 3, please. We see a section there at the top called Overview.
Yes.
Describes K15, and a section called The System.
Yes.
That?
Yes.
And essentially that section, the system, says that the overall wall construction must reflect standard design details as shown in the 8th issue of Kingspan's marketing literature.
Yes.
And those were, that is the marketing literature you provided to him at your meeting, yes?
Yes.
Can we go on to the 4th page, please, under the heading Requirement B, Fire Safety Considerations. It's about halfway down the page. And there the summary reads, K15 has been tested in accordance with, and then lists 4 tests, BS 8414 Part 1, EN 13641, and then 476 Parts 6 and 7. And under that, we see these words, from the results, it can be considered as a material of limited combustibility and meets the criteria for Class 0 classification for surface spread of flame. Moving on to page 5, please. Under the heading Requirement B4, External Fire Spread, we see this. Since K15 can be considered a material of limited combustibility, it is suitable for use in all situations shown on diagram 40 of ADB volume 2, including those parts of a building more than 18 meters above the ground. In the latter circumstances, the cladding system and the substrate to which the insulation is applied must also meet the requirement for limited combustibility. Where the substrate is a metal frame wall system rather than masonry or concrete, a non-combustible lining board must be specified to the external face of the metal wall frame. I want to ask you this first, please. You knew at the time this certificate was issued and had, I think, always known that K15 is not a material of limited combustibility, is it?
Yes, correct.
Do you accept that the most natural reading of the 2 sections on fire in this certificate we have just looked at is that K15 can be considered to be a material of limited combustibility?
Yes, the way it's wrote.
The way it's read?
The way it's read. My only understanding is that is this because it was classed as a system that somehow the wording has been moved away from just K15 and is treating it as an overall system?
The problem is K15 is not a system, is it?
No, I agree, but I'm thinking is, I'm just trying to think why that wording was put in the way it is.
Mr. Pack, you had seen that wording in the draft.
Sorry?
You had seen that wording in the draft.
I would have seen that wording in the draft, yes. I can only think that why was that wording used? Was it because it was based upon a substrate of limited combustibility and a masonry wall of non-combustibility, and therefore when you go to diagram 40 and you test an insulation above 18 meters, it can be read that is that material following the fact that it could be classed as limited combustibility?
I'm sorry, I don't follow. Can we just be a bit simpler about this? Do you accept that the overall effect of this is to suggest to a reader that K15 is a material of limited combustibility?
Yes.
And that is absolutely not correct, is it?
Correct.
You didn't notice that in the draft? You didn't think to correct it?
I guess we relied upon the advice of the LABC, Herefordshire Council. This wording would have been pulled together because it's not just one sentence there. It's referencing the cladding, it's referencing the substrate. They're referencing diagram 40, they're referencing proof document B. I mean, when you look at it, it's not just isolating the insulation on its own. So that's what I'm trying to say. Has it been written in a way that it's considering the whole construction? It's not just taking the insulation on its own. However, I do agree in hindsight, that could have been reworded slightly better.
Well, when you say it could have been reworded slightly better, do you mean the words "since K15 can be considered a material of limited combustibility" ought to have been removed?
Yes, I agree that limited combustibility in the same sentence as since K15 could
It's
have been.
plainly misleading, isn't it?
It is misleading, but you've got to read the rest of the paragraph that follows it.
Well, let's do that. It says there, since it can be considered a material of limited combustibility, it is suitable for use in all situations shown in diagram 40 of ADB, including those parts of a building more than 18 meters above the ground. There's absolutely no restriction, qualification, or caveat there on the use of K15 on buildings more than 18 meters above the ground, is there? It says all situations.
It does. It says where the substrate is a metal wall system rather than masonry or concrete, a non-combustible board must be specified. And I think if you move further into the document, it actually refers to the fact that the cladding has to be limited combustibility. In fact, it's the sentence above actually. It says the cladding system and the substrate to which the insulation is applied must also meet the requirements for limited combustibility. So that makes me think that if the cladding is of limited combustibility and the masonry substrate is of limited combustibility, K15 can be considered to be used in those parts of a building more than 18 meters.
It's incredibly confusing, isn't it?
It is. I agree. It's not worded the best, but our understanding was that as long as the substrate was was of limited combustibility, the cladding was of limited combustibility, which is what I go back to previously in my statements and today. That was the understanding. Clearly, you can see that the other types of cladding that we discussed earlier have not been included.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Troop, but Mr. Pack, can you help me with this? You were, or at least certainly are now, familiar with the relevant provisions of ADB. I think that's right, isn't it?
Sorry, can you say it again, please?
You are familiar with the relevant provisions of ADB, which deal with insulation.
Now or back in 2008?
Well, both, but in 2008. You knew that ADB required insulation to be of limited combustibility.
Yes, above 18 meters. Yes.
ADB does not say that requirement is in any sense dependent on the substrate or the rain screen, does it?
I cannot recall what the actual paragraph says.
Well, I'm curious to know why you think that K15 could be used as insulation in a case where the substrate and the cladding were of limited combustibility, if that didn't appear in ADB.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier today, our understanding was that from the advice of LABC through this document, they were clearly telling us that it can be.
So you preferred their advice to the provisions of the guidance, did you?
Well, I guess we just relied upon the LABC as they were the third party that were involved with this type of process and approval. So they were the one that came up with this particular text, and the fact that they worded it in a way that it could be used behind a cladding of limited combustibility and the substrate of limited combustibility.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Troop.
Thank you. I want to take you back, please, to David Jones's evidence, HBC 6029 at page 36. Looking at the penultimate paragraph of his evidence on that page, he says this: on the basis of my knowledge at that time, the range of evidence in A to H above, that's from his own witness statement, was sufficient for me to make a judgment that K15 could be considered a material of limited combustibility. Do you see that his understanding, the author of the certificate, appears to have been exactly as it reads, that K15 was to be considered to be a material of limited combustibility?
I cannot comment on how David Jones made the judgment that K15 could be considered a material of limited combustibility.
I'm not asking you to comment on how he made the judgment, Mr. Pack. I'm just asking you, well, let me put it differently. Does it surprise you to learn that in fact, he meant the certificate to be read exactly as it does read on an actual reading, that K15 could be considered to be a material of limited combustibility?
It would read that way, yes.
And that is utterly wrong, isn't it?
Correct.
All right. Is it genuinely your evidence that you did not know that is what he meant to say in his type approval summary document?
Yes, correct.
You did not know he was that under that impression when you saw the draft?
Correct.
Do you think you should have noticed this when you saw the draft?
In hindsight, yes. But at the time when I received this, I passed it to the technical team that are involved with this side of the business for them to check over. But in hindsight, I agree, the wording could be seen as indicating that the K15 was of a material limited combustibility.
Can we go please to KIN 405385? This is an email into which you and Gareth Mills again are copied, and it's an email from Ivan Meredith to Mark Swift. In it, he says this: personally, well, let's look at the subject title, approved document B as discussed. And you can tell me in a moment whether you remember it. Personally, I would just say that now we have the LABC document, and as long as the guidance within it is followed, there are no limitations of use for K15 in high-rise external ventilated facades. This document will be available to all LABC. Therefore, we will not get any problems in the future when seeking approval for use from local authority building control officers. From now on, when I'm challenged, I'm simply going to send the LABC document and let that do the talking. I have copied AP and GM to allow them to comment. Do you remember reading that email, Mr. Pack?
No.
Do you know whether or not you offered any comments?
I do not recall the email, and I do not recall any comments.
He has. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I would disagree with what's written in that email.
What would you disagree with in it?
That the LABC document didn't give didn't state that there are no limitations. There were limitations to the use of K15. So I don't agree with that sentence where it says LABC document, and as long as the guidance within it is followed, there are no limitations. There were limitations within the in the document.
What limitations were there within the document?
In terms of the masonry in terms of the substrate, in terms of the cladding. And there was also, if you refer to the certificate, if we could bring that up on screen, please.
Of course, it's KIN 405705.
So if you go to where it says conditions of the certification.
Yes.
Number 4.
Yes.
It says this certificate should not be regarded as a formal approval under the building regulations.
I'm so sorry, I don't follow the relevance. Of course, it's not a formal approval, it's a certificate.
So,
How is that a restriction on the use of K15 over 18 metres?
so what I'm saying is that if you go back to the email that was just wrote to say that, so I can go back to the,
Yes, of course. I'm so sorry. It's KIN 40. There it is.
so where we're talking about there being no limitations, there
Yeah.
are limitations because we have to still prove that the construction we're using meets the building regulations.
Yes, and bearing in mind that K15 is a combustible material, that could be done through testing to 8414 and a system meeting the criteria in BR 135, yes?
Yes.
All right, you say that you don't remember receiving this email. Were you aware that Ivor Meredith, as technical project leader, was of the view that what this certificate granted or gave to Kingspan was the ability to say that there were no further limitations on the use of K15 on high-rise buildings?
No, I disagree with that.
You might disagree with it. Were you aware that that was the strategy?
No.
Nobody discussed that with you?
No.
You heard no one talking about it?
No.
Did you ever hear anyone saying that the LABC document would do the talking or anything of that nature?
No.
Do you accept, having looked at the fire sections of the certificate, that that would only work? The LABC certificate could only give Kingspan the opportunity to say that there were no further limitations for the use of K15 over 18 metres if it was read as meaning that K15 is a material of limited combustibility.
Sorry, say that question again, please.
It was far too long a question. The only situation in which there could be no limitation for the use of an insulation material above 18 metres would be if it was non-combustible or a material of limited combustibility.
Correct,
You
yes.
accept that?
Yes.
So the only way in which Mr. Meredith and others within Kingspan could be thinking that this certificate gave them license to say there are no further limitations is if it was being understood to mean K15 is a material of limited combustibility or can be considered to be one.
Okay, I understand your point. I cannot comment on what Ivor Meredith was taking from this certificate and this approval. I can only comment on what my recollection at the time, and my recollection at the time was that it was worded in a way that it didn't give us free license, it did limit us, and it did only allow us to be used behind a non-combustible cladding.
But the limitations you say are the fact that it doesn't constitute a formal approval under the building regulations, which, forgive me, is just obvious from the fact that it's a certificate, and that it contains the sentence about putting a non-combustible liner onto steel frame systems, yes? Those are the limitations.
Yeah, and it also mentions that the substrate and the cladding must be of limited combustibility.
Yes.
I know it breaks down the masonry and the steel frame, but it also says that the substrate must be of limited combustibility. Now that can either, well, at the time, as I said earlier today, my understanding was that was either a masonry background or a steel stud with a non-combustible lining. That was my terminology in my head that I thought was what it meant. So therefore the certificate said you had to have a substrate of limited combustibility. It also mentions that the cladding had to be a limited combustibility too.
Can we go back, please, to Philip Heath's great news email at KIN 405383. I understand you've already told us that you've seen this before.
Yes.
I just want to look at it again. He says there, great news. Please find attached LABC approval for K15. And then he goes on to give a summary, I suppose, of what LABC approval is and what the certificate does, what the benefits are. I'm going to ask again, at this stage, did you understand what it was that Philip Heath saw as cause for celebration?
Only the fact that we'd got another LABC approval following the previous with the tapered insulation. I didn't see it other than anything more than it was a nice to have, but I would certainly not use it as a carte blanche approach to go out there to say that you can use K15 behind all types of cladding and forget doing fire testing. That is not how I read this at the time.
Well, if we look at the third paragraph of his email, please, he says this: the highlight of this certificate and supporting documentation is the requirement under B4 of ADB, external fire spread. And then he sets it out verbatim from the approval, since K15 can be considered a material of limited combustibility. And do you see that he's even used bold font there for the words material of limited combustibility?
Yes.
That is the particular section which is the focus of his celebration, isn't it? Clearly.
If clearly with yes, but I can't understand what was going through Philip's mind when he wrote it, but you're right, he has highlighted the material limited combustibility, but if you carry on reading that paragraph,
Yes.
what he should have highlighted was, in the latter circumstances, the cladding system and the substrate to which the insulation is applied must also meet the requirements for limited combustibility. That should have been highlighted in his email.
Well, forgive me, that's the second time you've referred to that sentence, and I'm trying to understand how you think that assists in making the situation clearer. What it says is, in the latter circumstances, now that is a reference to those parts of a building more than 18 meters above ground, isn't it, in the previous sentence? So in the latter circumstances, meaning over 18 meters, yes, the cladding system and the substrate to which the insulation is applied must also meet the requirement for limited combustibility. The word also meaning in ordinary language, as well as. So the cladding system, the outer panels and the substrate must also meet the requirement for limited combustibility, as well as K15, as though K15 meets that requirement. That's in fact what that says, isn't it?
Yes. What I don't know is that a mirror image of what was written in the certificate, or is that Philip Heath's text that's being used there? But all I remember
is a mirror image, I can confirm that.
Okay, thank you. All I can record is that I do not know why he highlighted it in bold. And all I can recall is that, as far as I was aware, the cladding had to be of limited combustibility, and so did the substrate, before our product could be considered.
All right. He also uses, I think if we can go down to the next page, please, perhaps to the top of the next page. He also uses bold font for your name there. Do you see that? Special thanks go to Andrew Pack for his consistent endeavours driving this forward with the LABC. Yes. What were your thoughts on that at the time?
I guess he was just thanking me for the small amount of work that I did on the system approval. I other than just saying thank you, I do not recall what was behind highlighting my name in bold.
No, but he's not thanking you for your small admin role, is he? He's thanking you for your consistent endeavours driving this forward.
I'm not quite sure what the consistent endeavours driving this forward entails, because there certainly wasn't consistent endeavours from my side.
So is it fair for me to put it in this way? From this email, it looks as though this is a pretty important moment in the story or the life of K15. And your evidence is that you don't really know why that is. It was a nice to have, and you don't know why he's focused on the words material of limited combustibility.
Yes.
All right. Can we look very quickly, please, at a press release. It's KIN 408748. The date on the top left-hand side is the 3rd of July 2009, yes? And we see this, Kingspan first to make the grade with LABC. You see that? All right. Do you know who Kingspan would routinely send their press releases to?
No.
Do you remember ever seeing this one?
No.
Right. Can we just go? No, we'll leave that there, I think. We'll leave that one there. I'm going to take you now to, I'm going to talk a little about what happened after the LABC certificate was obtained in May 2009. We don't need to go to it, but Mr. Heath has given evidence to this inquiry to the effect that following that certificate being obtained, he gave instructions that no further large-scale fire testing should be carried out on K15. Did he give that instruction to you?
No, not as far as I recall.
Were you aware of that instruction, or that that was the effect of having obtained the LABC certificate?
No, I was not aware.
Can we just go back, please, to KIN 405383? And to the second page, please. We've already seen there, that's where he offers special thanks to you.
Yes.
And then in the second part of that sentence, he says, so this is towards the end of the first line, and for the time being, this should complete the toolkit for K15 rain screen board. Do you see that?
Yes.
What does that mean?
I do not know.
Do you remember seeing that at the time?
No.
Do you remember the technical advisors being told that their toolkit for selling K15 was now complete?
No.
And then last line, in the event you require further information on this, please contact either Andrew or myself. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you remember seeing that?
No.
Why was he directing queries to you?
I can only think because I was obviously the person that was involved with the LABC type approval. So I can only think that he put me on that email because of that. Obviously, this system type approval, this obviously only had a 3-year shelf life, I believe, as well. And the appropriate people were involved in the certification following on from this document. I believe it was around 2009, just after this happened, that I actually moved into emerging markets, and the subsequent document, I believe, changed to some other format, which I was never involved with from the so from the moment that that email was sent out from Phil Heath saying about this LABC document, I've never been involved with LABC since that date. The appropriate people have now been involved over the last 12 years. I believe it has been updated every 3 years. It's not called an LABC type approval anymore.
No.
I believe it's got a registered details document. And we've had the technical projects team working on that every 3 years to update it. I have no idea what the new approvals look like these days, but as to why he put my name on that document, I can only think it was because of my involvement with obtaining that LABC.
Yes, and did you receive any queries or inquiries about it? Can you remember?
No, when the document came through in May 2009, 2009, I was then starting to look into Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. So my remit changed, and my focus turned away from the UK. So I never had any email correspondence, any sort of further communication in regards to this certification. So I never got any feedback or what was the outcome of this document. So all I can say is at the moment that that was issued, that was the last that I had involvement with it.
Mr. Pack, those are the end of my questions for you for now, but I'm going to hand over back to the chairman because it may be that there are questions from others at this stage. So if you could wait for a moment, please.
Yes, well, Mr. Packett, when council's got to the end of her questions, we always have a short break because there are other people following the inquiry who need an opportunity to consider whether there should be further questions asked. So we're going to take another short break now until I think 20 to 5 our time. I'm sorry this is going on into the evening a bit for you, and I apologize for that, but I don't think we'll be taking too long. And we'll come back at 20 to 5 and see whether there are any more questions for you. All right, and please remember, don't talk to anyone else about your evidence during the break. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
we're back with you. Are you with us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Oh, hello again. So you can hear me and see me.
Yes, I can. Thank
Good,
you.
thank you. Well, now we'll find out from Ms. Troop whether there are any more questions for you. Ms. Troop?
Thank you. There are no further questions for this witness.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Pack, I'm sorry we kept you for the extra quarter of an hour, but sometimes there are further questions. So it just remains really for me to thank you very much indeed for making yourself available to give evidence. It's been very useful to hear what you had to tell us. And I'm grateful to you for making yourself available at a rather odd time of day, because it must now be, what, coming up to 9 o'clock in your local time?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So we ruined your evening, but I'm sorry about that. We are grateful to you. So
Thank you.
and there's no more questions, and now you are free, so to speak, to go and talk to anyone you like.
Okay.
All right. Thank you
Yes.
very much indeed. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That's it for the day. We'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you very much.